I think that we can all agree on that some games age better than others. Some games age like fine wine, other games age like milk. And that doesn't necessarily make them a bad game. It just means that sometimes the gameplay mechanics get outdated. There's other games in the same franchise or the same genre that come out and redefine the game and change things for the better. Sometimes the controls really start to feel outdated. We see that with the early Resident Evil games, where the tank controls just do not do the game any justice. And it's very hard for people to go back to try to replay those. We also see games such as the original Tomb Raider that falter in terms of the execution of the controls, because so many games have come forward and done this a lot better. It's hard to go back and play with those controls. They are in no way broken games, it's just when it comes to how well a game is aged, a lot of times those controls are what really limit their potential to reach out and branch to another audience. I've recently ran into this particular issue with the original Shin Megami Tensei Game. A game, mind you, that is a really good game. It's just held back by some very aged mechanics. First and foremost, the biggest problem that this game has is a lack of a minimap. In this day and age, most RPGs, most games, most things you have some sort of a minimap, or at least a general idea of where you are going. Shin Megami Tensei does not really provide that. And the problem with that is a lot of the environments blend together because you're in a more modern day setting, so some of the walls and structures inside of the game actually look quite similar. So you're running around in a huge area, you're going to be running around in circles like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to figure out where you're going, running into battle after battle, and having no real direction as to where you are going. The game also does not really give you any indicators as to where specific item shops are, other than just a name that simply pops up on the screen when you pass by it and face that door. It can be a little bit ridiculous, so a mini-map would go a long way in making that game feel a hell of a lot better. I also feel like the game in itself, because of the technical limitations, that the environments do kind of feel too much together and that they really didn't differentiate themselves. It would be nice to have at least in turn, where certain stores were, so you kind of know where to go, and at least have like little billboards or something on there. But again, technical limitations might have prohibited Atlas from being able to go about doing it in that specific way. Another thing that Shin Megami Tensei does that is really, really hard to try to get into is its lack of tutorials. The game just simply gives you your characters, gives you the story, gives you the premise, throws you in the midst of the game and says figure it out yourself. You're not getting any tutorials. The game definitely doesn't hold your hand. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, I think in some ways that's going to offset a lot of people from going back and playing that particular game, because the game just does not provide any tutorials whatsoever. Had I not had a history with Persona, had I not played some of the earlier Persona titles, I would have not really understood the in-depth system that was negotiating with demons to try to get them to join your cause. The game also doesn't explicitly come out and say that you can go to a certain place to fuse demons. You just kind of haphazardly stumble across it, hopefully, and you kind of learn where to go from there. The game is very much an exploration. It's very much an early RPG. And back in the 90s when this game was released, it probably would have been completely okay. But we've gotten into this time cycle where we've kind of had games hold our hands just a little bit, teach us the ins and outs of the games, the tutorials. And something else that this game doesn't really do is tell you what the character builds are. Each of the 4 main characters have a specific build that you will want to set them up into. You have the main character who basically can't use magic, so if you allocate all of your stats to his magic and then realize he can't use magic, you're kind of screwing yourself over to begin with. You have the law hero, which is strictly a magic-based character, so again, you put all of his strength in there. You're going to have that. And then you have the chaos hero, who is more of a tank hero. He's more of a strength asset. One you're going to pretty much sink into stamina and strength. But the game doesn't explicitly come out and tell you that this is what you need to do. The game in itself doesn't particularly set that up in a way to understand what these stats even really do, kind of leaving that up to the player to decide what to do. Certain stats are going to give you an increased boost in your intel. Your intel is going to allow you to be able to better communicate with demons. Your luck may give you that little bit of nudge to get, so you might get lucky and catch a demon that you're trying to talk to. The game doesn't tell you anything whatsoever and just kind of lets the player figure all of this out themselves. And that in itself makes the game feel very, very dated, very, very hard for even someone who considers themselves a bit seasoned with RPGs to particularly follow. My biggest fault with the game is how much that lack of minimap is actually there. I simply will admit I just do not have the patience to sit down and try to figure out where to go. Even looking up maps online doesn't particularly help. It's still very easy to get lost. It's definitely one of those games that, well, you're probably going to benefit in making a map your own and having a notebook by your side to kind of have all these notes of what all these different fusions and things like that are going to do. The game didn't age very well when it comes to certain mechanics. I will say this, the game in other aspects has aged very well. Its story in particular, I feel, is still really interesting. Because its story's just not simply, and the Shin Megami Tensei franchise is kind of known for this, but it's not just as simple as good versus evil. There is always kind of an underlying factor. You have God, who is very much, in the veins of making people choose the right side of things, keeping the law and order, kind of telling people what to do. You have Satan, who wants complete chaos at this point and wants the world to be able to have free will and have no restrictions or law or anywhere. And then you have neutral, kind of the in-between God's plan and Satan's plan that you can particularly choose. And the game does force you to choose a certain affinity. So you can go with chaos, you can go with law, or you can go with neutral. And some of you may recognize that from certain tabletop element games. You have your law hero, your chaos hero, and your neutral hero, kind of someone who sits in between. So I think that's kind of interesting to have that bit of a balance there. Now, depending on what affinity you do choose, the ending kind of plays out very differently. But I love the concept of that. That's not even something that really a whole lot of games really try to emphasize and focus on in that respect as well. But basically, you're in the midst of a nuclear war between Japan and the U.S., and you kind of get stuck in there. I haven't gotten to that point where the affinity goes in there. I haven't gotten to the point where you make it to the U.S. Embassy, and shit goes to hell. But it's something I really want to focus on and get into. This is a game I want to be able to play, but that lack of that mini-map, that lack of the little bit of tutorials explaining some things that I wish I would have known, has kind of hindered that play style for me. Another thing this game does that I think is very, very interesting is its character, or its demon design. For a SNES game, there's been a lot of detail that has gone into making these characters, or these monsters, stand out. Each kind of character has its own unique type of look to it. Final Fantasy, and again, I can't speak for everything further going on into the series, because I haven't played it, but Final Fantasy did tend to use a lot of rehashed creatures, just give them different colors, maybe add a little bit more details, things like that in there. And Shin Megami Tensei really tries to focus on making these demons look very different. Anybody who's played any form remotely of Persona 5, other Shin Megami Tensei games, you're going to recognize a lot of these characters as they look very similar across the span of all games. I want to say Kazumi Kaneko, who did the monster design for the game, they've pretty much become a staple of the Shin Megami Tensei series at this point. But the game isn't inherently bad, and this is a game that I feel like just adding an inclusion of a mini-map really perfect on the Nintendo 3DS. Just put the little mini-map down there on the bottom screen, or even just giving someone that little option to hit the start button to pull up that menu to kind of see where they are, would make this game from irritatingly frustrating to play to being able to be an enjoyable experience. It is a game that I really think Atlus could benefit from making a remake, or at least a port with some enhanced gameplay mechanics into it and giving those players a little bit of a tutorial. Because I do feel like this game holds up, but just because of some of those small annoyances and some of the things that I've ran into, and not building up the main character the way that I should have, I've set myself up into a pretty tedious grind or just starting over, and that's not something that I really want to do right now, especially after sinking about 25 hours into the game already. But I want to know, have you guys ever stumbled across a game that you just simply could not play because it did not age well? Because the gameplay mechanics feel far inferior to what video games are being able to deliver today. I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions on this. If you are a YouTuber, make a video response to this. And leave your video down below in the comment box there, and I will make sure that that does not get put in the spam folder. But leave a brief description, hey, here's my video response to this of the game that didn't age well for me, and leave those there. You guys have been watching the Spoony Bard. Be sure to hit subscribe there for me to keep up to date with all of my content, so you guys can check out my latest videos. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter and all of my other social media links down below in that description box. Be sure to also follow me on Twitch, because I will also end up uploading regularly on Twitch as well. You guys have been watching the Spoony Bard, and most importantly, stay happy, be happy, game happy. Spoony Bard is checking out.